Hello, everyone. My name is River Hain, and I'm the Lead Solutions Analyst for the Machine Assistance Program at Autodesk.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yizel Vizcarra, and I'm a Conversation Engineer at Autodesk, focusing on expanding our assistance capabilities.
And this technical difficulty actually works out well. We realized we did not include a slide to give an overview of what Autodesk is. So for those of you in the room that don't know, Autodesk is an enterprise software company that supplies software for engineers and designers to design and make things. So the best way to think about that is if you want to search for something, you'd go to Google. If you want to buy something, you'd go to Amazon or Walmart. And if you want to make something or design something, you're going to go to Autodesk. So without further ado, I'll give you a kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to start things off by talking a little bit about why we went conversational and the scope of customer engagement. We're then going to talk about how we did that and what the results were. Then we're going to spend the majority of the presentation talking about what we've learned along the way, and then we're going to wrap things up with talking about what's next. So before we talk about why Autodesk went conversational, I think it's important that we call out Autodesk's company goals. But actually, it might be equally important to take one further step back and think about where those goals come from. So, and you can do that by kind of looking at today's customer engagement landscape, right? So today, the way that customers interact with brands has changed radically. We all know that. And it's kind of a consequence of a lot of technological breakthroughs recently, mainly in the areas of accessibility and usability. We're now in a world where the way that customers interact with businesses is kind of, it's digital. They expect companies to be available 365 days a year, 24/7. And they also expect that all of those experiences are personalized, which is why 2 of our top 3 company goals are around becoming a customer-centric company and digitizing our brand. The third goal you see up here is scalable engagement, and this is derived basically by looking at our 3 financial goals that stem from us switching to a subscription-based business model. And so when you look at these 3 goals and you kind of take it from the lens of customer engagement, you can see an immediate need for a scalable, user-centered, and digital solution, right? And that actually works out really well for us. We work in the Machine Assistance Program, and the 4 goals for our program really do embody that need. So our goals are to handle the growing engagement volume without incrementally increasing headcount. We also want to generate new insights about our customers so that we can make better and more intelligent decisions, as well as design our workflows appropriately. We'd also like to provide the best possible answer to the customer with the least amount of effort, and we want to do all of this while positively representing and promoting the Autodesk brand. So you kind of get an idea as to what our 3 goals are, but I do really quickly want to level set on what those mean to us at Autodesk so that we're all on the same page. Being customer-centric to us just means putting the customer at the heart of everything we do. The idea here is that customer lifetime value is actually a proxy measure of the success of our business. When it comes to being a digital company, our goal here is to create a seamless user experience that's seamless across all digital touch points and enables self-help wherever possible. In terms of scaling, it's pretty intuitive. What we want to do here is provide solutions that allow us to modify and adapt according to business needs, as well as changing customer demands and desires with no cost to Autodesk. And the last thing to consider is all these 3 things kind of created that need that I talked about, a need for a user-centered, scalable, and digital solution. And our team was responsible for coming up with something. And what we chose was what we would call a dialogue system, which is more commonly referred to as an intelligent assistant. And the reason that we were able to select that as our solution was because of recent technological breakthroughs, mainly in the field of AI, particularly speech-to-text, text-to-speech, natural language processing, the availability of dialogue design frameworks, and then the proliferation of messaging platforms. And that's what led us to create AVA, our Autodesk Virtual Agent. Now, in an effort to kind of highlight the benefits of a dialogue system, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why we chose to create one. So the primary benefit was covered a lot today, and that's just the fundamental intuitive nature of a dialogue system. So it's kind of a quintessential example of user-centered design, and user-centered design is kind of a fundamental characteristic of being a customer-centric company. For those of you that don't know what user-centered design is, it's just this idea that we would design and develop things based off our, the forecast as to how users will interact with that solution or product. The idea there and the goal there is really that you're creating a solution that does not require the user to adapt or modify their behaviors in order to seamlessly interact with it. So as you can imagine, a dialogue system, like I said, a great example of that. It's intuitive, and that's just kind of because, I mean, think about it. From day one, we're all taught to interact with each other through dialogue. So interacting with a machine in that way is a rather intuitive and easy and familiar experience. So as you see up here along the top, I think this illustration really does a good job of highlighting that intuitive nature. It kind of shows the progression of the user interface over the last several decades. We started with punch cards, we moved over to command line, then we had the GUI, the touch screen. We're now in the era of voice commands. And so it only seems kind of obvious that a conversational interface, ideally one that's powered by voice and or video, is kind of the next progression there. I'm trying to remember who gave the quote, but there's a great quote out there around the progression of the UI being kind of a gradual reduction of the layers of abstraction between machines and humans. And I think that a conversational interface really does embody that. So beyond that primary benefit, there are some additional things worth calling out. It's an adaptive experience, meaning that we can adapt it conditionally based on the interaction and personalize the experience. It's intuitive to configure, and people talked a lot about that today when they talked about the necessity to have liberal arts and cognitive sciences involved. It's something that a developer doesn't have to create. It requires kind of cross-functional collaboration with many different areas. It has nonlinear cost. In other words, there might be a little bit of an upfront cost, but the ongoing marginal cost is incredibly low relative to humans. And then there's both feature flexibility and a high degree of modularity. So by flexibility, what I mean is the various components that might make up your dialogue system, for example, the recognition layer, can be achieved through intent classification, entity detection, there might be context. There's a lot of different tactics that can be used there, which makes it very flexible. Modularity, what I mean by that is that those components, like intent classification, or let's say speech to text, are components that can be pulled out as modules and used for other solutions across the company. And then lastly, some of the other benefits help us to become that digital company that we're striving to become. And that's around the notion that they're available 24/7 by 365 days. And additionally, they're highly integratable, meaning that we can deploy them across a plethora of channels and platforms and devices. So rather than introduce kind of what Ava does and who she is, in the spirit of automation, I'm going to go ahead and let her do that for me. I just hope it's not too laggy, but let's see.
Hi, my name is Ava, and I'm the Autodesk Virtual Assistant. I'm still fairly young, and human communication is proving to be rather challenging. But I'm learning all the time and being trained and retrained to better understand and respond to you. As of now, I've been trained to help with some common questions and services so that our more knowledgeable human agents can help users with the more challenging questions.
Okay, so it always fascinates me to see people's reactions when they first see an intelligent assistant introduce itself. In the audience, I saw some people look very amused. I saw other people look intrigued. And then I saw some of you get a little creeped out, like, oh, what is this? A robot's talking to me. Robots are going to take over the world. And that's actually a very fluid transition onto what I'm about to talk about next. And it's essentially talking about how it was perceived internally here at Autodesk. So our customer support representatives also thought that this was fearful. Like they thought, I'm going to lose my jobs, Ava's going to automate me, like what's next, right? And we really handled those concerns with a lot of urgency, and after a few meetings, we really wanted to emphasize that AI is a complement and is not meant to be a replacement. So we really wanted to emphasize on the fact that this is a tool that we can provide for both customers, since Autodesk was in the past notoriously known for terrible customer support. We needed to scale quickly, provide more customer support for our customers, as River mentioned, 24/7, 365. And we live in that era where today customers really do expect that type of support. So we looked into Ava as our solution, and today our agents are actually using Ava as a help to get their jobs done quicker. They get quick answers from there. They're able to perform certain transactions that make their lives a lot faster and easier and do less of that automated process that they didn't enjoy so much. So now their cognitive abilities can fully focus on the more complex topics and full support and interaction between the customers. I apologize in advance if I look back. We lost our helper screen. So I mentioned earlier that Ava was a big hit internally. And nonetheless, it was also a big hit externally. We found that a lot of our customers were interacting with Ava. We've averaged around 64,000 conversations a month, putting us at 86 times more customers helped per day in comparison to human agents who take about 25 cases a day. And we've also found that we have less than 4-minute transaction time for resolutions, at least. And that means that a lot of customers used to come and request activation codes or some type of assistance for downloads, given that their downloads failed. That used to take days to try and figure out what the use case is, or hey, like, let me get you a download file. They would need to create a case. But with Ava has allowed us to definitely provide that type of resolution time. Sorry. And then we have 86% customer satisfaction rate because of our quick solution time within our customers. So as I mentioned all of these numbers have definitely exceeded our expectations when we took on this initiative and put together this team. And it's also exceeded beyond that. It's actually become the face of customer engagement at Autodesk. We found a lot of publicity given that we were able to innovate on our back-end operation systems, and therefore that led to our voice and video beta gaining a lot more publicity to get creative and innovative. So that leads me to talking a little bit more about our learnings. I mentioned a lot about how we did really well, and our numbers are speaking for themselves. But how did we get through the bumpy road? Because it sure wasn't easy. So hopefully you get to walk away with some key learnings that we wish we would have known before we started this endeavor. First things first, your team really matters. And I know it's been iterated throughout today's theme as to have a diverse team, and internally, and there's a term in psychology called cognitive diversity. Cognitive diversity essentially means that having people with different backgrounds and the way that they process information differs. So with this, you get people from the computational linguistics field, you get people in philosophy, you have people in finance, you have people in creative writing, cognitive science, and so on. And all those topics, all those majors that I just commented on are people from our team. Our team is extremely diverse in that sense, and we're able to provide a better customer experience given that we have that background for conversation design and even data labeling, which brings me to my next slide. Decisions affect everyone, including those made by algorithms. So there's this thing called algorithmic bias, and algorithmic bias is essentially humans' bias being explicitly shown through some of the training data that you train your algorithms with. And why does that matter for Autodesk, right? So for a company that has a lot of data and a lot of resources, it's important for you to provide the proper answers for your customers. You need to know all of your customers, and we're a global company. It's so many customers that we need to take into account. So how do we do this? Do we mine our customer support data, like historic data, in order to get those main topic points and train our algorithm today with some of that? But our technology is advancing so quickly that we can't just use our historic data because a lot of our solutions have changed. So then do we generate new data? Do we launch our bot, get data, then label? And all of that labeling, that manual process falls on us, on our team, on our very cognitively diverse team. So being in that team, we get to start labeling data, but we realize that a lot of us are new. And in our team, we also have people that have been there for 10 years, but a lot of the people who were doing the more manual process starting from the beginning were less than a year in. So how do we account for a lot of that old terminology that has been used for the last 10 years within Autodesk? And that meant that we needed a hybrid of the two and go into it with the intention in mind that we have to keep this holistic customer in mind. And that comes with looking at both historic and new data and moving forward with that.
Cool. So the next takeaway we have is that failures are only failures if you accept them as such. Really, failures to us at Autodesk are opportunities. Now, within the kind of scope of intelligent assistance, we have 4 failure strategies wherein we treat a failure as an opportunity. The first and perhaps most intuitive is an opportunity to immediately improve the system. So in the example shown here, what you see is a customer who has indicated that the solution provided by Ava was not helpful. But furthermore, what you see is we've set up a framework so that upon indicating that it was not helpful, we've asked them to explain the root cause as to why that was not helpful. And by setting up this framework, what we've done is we've really enriched our feedback data to a level beyond just the signal of positive and negative in the form of helpful versus not helpful, and to a much more granular and actionable level that allows us to improve the system immediately. The next opportunity that we treat with failures is the opportunity to learn new ways that things are expressed or new expressions entirely. So the example shown here, what you see is a customer came to Ava and the first input they gave is nothing but a serial number. Now in the beginning, Ava had to apologize and indicate that she didn't know how to respond to that. But we saw such a high volume of this occurrence that we went to our customer support teams, who we work with quite regularly, and we said, hey, what's going on here? And what we learned from them is that a lot of our legacy Autodesk customers activate using what's called an activation code. And the way that they retrieve an activation code is by contacting Autodesk, providing their serial number, and in turn we give them an activation code to activate the license. Now this is a legacy behavior, and this process no longer exists, but our legacy customers still need to do this, and we were unfamiliar with that. We lacked that contextual understanding. So we kind of redid Ava, and she's now able to detect serial numbers through simple pattern recognition and respond by offering the opportunity to get an activation code immediately. The next opportunity that we see when it comes to failures is an opportunity to foster the relationship. Now this can be done by delighting the customer when they least expect it. It could also be done by building trust through transparency. It can also be done by kind of treating this as an opportunity to show your colors or abide by those persona values that you have for your bot. In the example shown here, a customer has indicated that they have an error. Ava's asked for the error message or code. The customer has indicated that it's error 57, and Ava has to inform the customer that she does not know how to respond to error 57. But what she's done here is she's been transparent, she's apologized, she's taken full accountability, taken all the blame off the user, and also indicated to the user that we will create an analyst ticket for an analyst to review this and determine if it's something that Ava can help out with in the future. Additionally, Ava has provided the user with the opportunity to contact a customer support representative immediately. Now, the last opportunity that comes with failures is an opportunity to try something new. So, in other words, you're at a point where you've failed and things can't get much worse. They're already pretty bad, so you might as well try something new. And what you see here is our natural language search beta coming in. It's something that we're building internally. So in this case, a user has described a really technical, complex, product-related issue that Ava, or actually it's actually just a question here, that Ava has not been trained to handle. And so rather than just apologizing and saying, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that, what Ava instead does is apologizes and then says, based off what you said, here are some things that I think might be able to help you. And she suggested the top 3 hits that we get back from our natural language search engine. Now, this might not help everybody. It might only help 20% of the people. But to us, some is always better than none, and there's no real negative cost in doing so. This also provides us with a great opportunity to collect feedback to improve this natural language search engine before it's launched into production.
So now that River has talked about failures as opportunity, I want to take a moment and show you guys an example of where we failed, clearly failed, and then talk a little bit more about how we iterated quickly. So this example here is a customer coming in and asking a technical support question, which we currently do not handle. The customer comes, asks the question, Ava responds with, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. And then the customer says, is this a joke? Keep in mind, is this a joke is typically very contextual. As humans, we would almost never respond with a joke. Meanwhile, Ava responded with, what do you call a fake noodle? An impasta. You know, sharing it today, it's funny. However, it wasn't really funny for us when we first saw it. We're like, okay, we failed really bad. We need to do something about this. Why would we even have jokes in the first place? We saw high demand for customers coming in and testing the intelligence of our bot. And we saw it happen, especially when you put a human face to it. They want to know what capabilities, what type of things that the bot is able to understand. So in this example, we noticed that we really needed to balance it out. We needed chit-chat for people who did come and test our bot, but we also needed to account for our customers' goals, because this bot is actually meant to help our customers get to a human agent or some sort. And I know River just touched on some of the solutions that we did, like today we're piloting new capabilities for technical support, and we're also looking into potential ways to escalate when we do see issues like these arise. But something to walk away from this slide is keep the context in mind, and it is important to constantly get to know your customer in order for you to keep a proper design in mind.
Cool. So I touched a little bit about the importance of feedback earlier, but there is a whole slide dedicated to it. To us, feedback is gold, and we say gold because gold is really nothing but a mineral, but its value comes in what you make of it. And similarly with feedback, there's a plethora of forms. There's quantitative, qualitative, implicit, explicit, and all of them have a tremendous amount of potential value, but that value is only there if it becomes realized. And so within the company, you need to have supporting end-to-end business processes in place that allow for you to take that value and let it become realized. So I want to show one example of how Autodesk used all 4 forms of feedback to identify a problem and subsequently derive a solution for it. So about 2 months ago, we launched a new activation workflow. And what we saw about 2 weeks into it is a much higher than usual escalation rate and a much lower in-product survey score. So at that point, we knew we had a problem. Then we took a more qualitative perspective and we looked at the feedback that's coming in from that in-product survey score, and we see a lot of people expressing that they're confused. You see confusing, I'm confused, what do you mean, question marks. And so at that point, we knew that the basis of the problem was confusion. From a more quantitative perspective, we realized that about 70% of the escalations and 70% of those low survey scores were coming from one node in particular. And that node is a node where we ask the users what license type they're on. Is it a subscription or a maintenance plan? Subsequently, what we see is that 31% of the people are actually not hitting either of those options, but rather hitting our catch-all true node, which indicates they're not saying either of those two things. So we figured, let's take it a little bit more explicitly. Let's see what those people that aren't hitting subscription or maintenance are actually saying. And what we see is that the majority of them are expressing that they don't know what license type they have. And there you have it. We knew the root cause is that users don't always know what license type they're on. Having this level of understanding allowed for us to implement a solution immediately, which we call Clarity Assistance, which is a dialogue framework set up to explain to users what the 2 license types are and which one, and how to tell which one they are a part of. This was done by just adding an I don't know option to the list of subscription, maintenance, and I don't know. And so there you have it.
So that brings us to our next point. You really want to focus on setting your expectations. And what that means, to iterate on the fact that we put a human face to our assistant, people expect a certain type of intelligence. But if you don't set your expectations, then humans will come in and simply type an open-ended question like, is this a joke? And you only learn that through a lot of analysis via your data. So our first time around, you'll see that the avatar was a little bit different. This was over a year ago. And we launched our introduction message. We spent a lot of time crafting this introduction message, and we thought, okay, well, let's just mention the 5 top capabilities Ava can answer to set those expectations. And what we found is that our customers were coming in, copying and pasting the bullet points, but never really asking us or telling us what was wrong, what was their issue. And the moment that they tested out this copy-paste bullet point, they would see Ava give a very generic answer, they'd give up, escalate immediately. So we started seeing a very high immediate escalation rate. And with that, we decided to test out a different approach, make it more conversational, provide some conversation options. So how do you interact with me? You can tell me, can you help me get a product key? And we gave those examples in the introduction. It's very short. We did see a slight reduction in immediate escalations, but it wasn't enough. And we felt, well, why not? Why not look into another iteration of installation and see of a hybrid of the two? And through a Microsoft tool, open source tool called Adaptive Cards, we were able to implement an interactive introduction. And this meant that we have icons, we have words mentioning the top 5 transactions that we can do, but also providing that natural language underneath as examples. And if users were to click one of these examples, and it would emulate their input as if they were requesting it, so it also provides an ability for us to provide a quick answer, and then it responds back with what the user is requesting. And this actually, we launched it a couple weeks ago, and so far what we've seen is that people are either clicking directly or asking us because we're providing those examples and actually telling us what is wrong, instead of immediately escalating.
All right, cool. So this slide, I actually have a whole nother presentation dedicated solely to this idea of aligning the system architecture and its components with the use case that you're trying to solve for. So I will try to keep it very high level here, but if you want to talk about it in more detail, please reach out. So at the highest level, what you need to know, and this was touched upon earlier, is that there's really a spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum, you have a task-oriented system, and on the other, a conversational. Task-oriented systems are those where you have a measurable outcome whose progress can be tracked. Conversational systems, on the other hand, are very open-ended in nature and are conversational. Now, most systems don't fall into one or the other, but rather the individual use cases within that system do. Most systems end up falling somewhere in this kind of green area called a hybrid. And that's because most systems solve multiple things, some of which are done through a task-oriented framework and some of which are done through conversational. For example, Ava is a hybrid system that is very much task-oriented because about 90% of what she does is task-oriented frameworks with a couple conversational frameworks scattered in for kind of customer delight and handling the chit-chat things that Yizel talked about earlier. Now, it's one thing to know what type of system you have or what type of system you'd like to build, but the reason that that's valuable is there are best practices, there's do's and don'ts that come along with each type of system. So as Yizel pointed out earlier, for example, taking an approach where you limit the variance of the possible user inputs via buttons or suggested replies, that's an example of something you might want to do on a task-oriented system where you're trying to guide the user towards a specified end goal. For conversational, you probably want to keep it a little bit more open-ended. We have about 30 best practices that we've identified for each system type, but I'm not going to get into that today. And then I'm going to wrap things up by kind of making the statement that that decision that you make around what type of system you should have at the highest level also applies down to the level of granularity for each component within the system. So we've identified kind of 5 key components, 3 of which are primary, 2 are secondary. The 3 primary are response, structure, and recognition. Recognition refers to how the system deciphers meaning from the user input. Response is how and what the system replies to the user, and structure is how the system manages the workflow as dialogue progresses. Now, deciding, for each of these, there's a plethora of methods and tactics that you can use to achieve this. We talked about some of the ones that can be used for recognition earlier. Similarly, with response, you could do a corpus-based retrieval method, you could do simple rules-based, etc. Now, which method and tactic you choose to use for each, it's a decision that you need to make based off of a ton of different factors. You have, your desire for scalability. You have your, anticipated variance in user input. You have your risk tolerance, et cetera, et cetera. And similarly, for deciding how you train the system to improve over time and what type of functionality is made available to the user, those kind of factors also tie into those decisions as well.
So as River just mentioned, the different types of dialogue systems, I want to emphasize on the design portion of it. So information hierarchy is key, and the way that you present that information is very critical for your users to walk away with something important. So let's talk about the 2 modalities that we have. We have text and we have voice and video. In our voice and video, we focus on the speech portion of it. So let me tell you a little secret that we found between switching from text to speech. We found that in text, you really want to put the important information first. Humans are lazy. They don't like to read, especially when it comes to customer support self-help articles. And they want to skim. You want to use bullet points, images, lists in order for them to condense that information and be as conservative as you can with the information that you're presenting to them. You want to make it easy for them to register that information. So with that, we use the Gestalt laws of grouping, which is a psychology principle that makes it more easily digestible for users to group things together. And we decided to present the information as so. We don't want to overwhelm the customers because if they want an article, they can more than clearly search that on Google, but we want to provide quick answers and the right answer. So with that, when we moved towards our voice and video beta, we found that important information is good to be said last. The human attention span is about 8 seconds long. So we tend to walk away after a conversation, remembering the last part of the conversation. In this scenario, we decided to expand our recordings for 12 seconds, where Ava tries to either summarize what we expect the user to walk away with, but we also combined it as a hybrid approach with the screen, and we decided to use text, voice, and video. So we use the assistant to refer the users to particular portions on the screen. The assistant can move, the assistant can turn over to the side of the screen that we're expecting the user to look at and refer to, hey, if you would like more information, click on the screen when it's too much information for the user to digest then and there. So the theme of this, and what I would like you guys all to walk away with, is that simplicity is key when presenting your information hierarchy. You don't want to overwhelm your customer. And with that being said, I want to touch a little bit more on a place where we weren't so conservative with the information. We were a little bit more risky, and how it became a smart risk. So our voice and video beta, which is the avatar that you saw earlier without the text screen, is essentially a project that we decided to take on early on by partnering with a company called Soul Machines. And through this partnership, we were aware that we were creating a virtual human, and it begins to get a little bit uncanny, right? And we knew that we would be taking a risk if we go on with this partnership and present this to our customers. Internally, we found the same thing. We had a mixture of emotions within our stakeholders, and I don't know, this is a little weird, do some market research and UX research. There wasn't much. So what do you do at that point? I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And because there was internal hesitation, we also saw that it was difficult for us to have cross-functional collaborations. And with that, given that it was new technology, there were technical limitations, and we couldn't really access that because we didn't have enough resources, and it was difficult to scale, and reporting became difficult back to our stakeholders. But nonetheless, we decided to explore it as a team and see what we can find to try and convince our stakeholders. So we took matters into our own hands, and we decided to do a UX research internally. A lot of what the research consisted of was about static images, and it was basically, we just wanted the perception of what our customers would think. So internally, we found that the people that we brought in were essentially inconclusive about how they felt about the bot. We saw some people like it, some people become mesmerized, some people saying she's intimidating, but I trust Autodesk. So that gave us a lead. It told us, although this study was in conclusion, we can still give it another shot, and we can elaborate a little bit more on what this can do.
Cool. So I'm going to try to breeze through this. But basically, like Yizel said, it was a huge risk for us to launch, a voice and video version of Ava. Something we haven't mentioned is that she is what you would call emotionally intelligent, in the sense that when you turn on your video camera to chat with her, she can detect your emotional states via facial recognition and then respond conditionally, both through her own gestures and mannerisms, as well as through conditional statements and workflows in our dialogue flow. But it was a huge risk, and we tried to mitigate that risk and make it more of a smart risk by engaging in primary research of our own. We also hired on an intern to conduct secondary research because there was little to none out there in the field of digital humans. We also engaged in kind of relentless stakeholder management throughout the whole project. We engaged in strategic partnerships with universities for research, as well as other clients of our vendor, Soul Machines, to share information and learnings. We position this project as something in alignment with our goal, which is to be a leader in customer engagement through disruptive technology. We implemented scalable frameworks and processes to kind of overcome those technical limitations that came along with the technology. And then maybe most importantly, we set up monitoring and reporting ahead of time before launching so that we can monitor this thing and adjust appropriately as needed. And so I will quickly share the results with you. Overall, very positive results, but a really interesting nuance. What we see is actually a very small, almost negligible change in the actual user experience. So the success rate and escalation rate really didn't change much. But what you see is through our survey scores, the perception of the user experience changed radically. We see a lot higher, more positive perception of the user experience. We see a lot of people telling us that it's more engaging and more effective, and that they, quote, achieved their goals more frequently. But the reality is, looking at the dialogue flows themselves, not much has changed. So it's a really interesting finding. And we got one more for you, and then we're done.
So as we continue talking about voice and video beta, we decided that it began to start feeling a little bit uncanny as we saw first initial hesitations from when we started our text modality, but also our video modality, right? So what do we do about this? We decided to build trust through transparency, and we think it's key to continue working in AI without people bombarding you about the uncanny valley. So something our director always says is the only way to get past the uncanny valley is to get through the uncanny valley. And with that, it's by building trust with transparency. So in this case, we decided to stick to purple eyes and really emphasize the purple eyes in our virtual assistant, and because that's a non-human entity. So we really wanted to emphasize that. We also disclosed that the assistant is not a human, it's an agent, and even in the name, it's an Autodesk Virtual Agent, emphasized on the virtual, and we disclosed that it's a beta whenever they decide to interact with the voice and video animation. And then something that's coming soon, because we have been working on new technology, we decided that sometimes a lot of our customers didn't necessarily engage in the voice and video beta because the introduction starts off as, right now, you can see or hear me, but I can't see or hear you. If you turn on your camera, I'll be able to see your facial expressions, which sounds really terrifying. I don't think I would opt into it. I'd be like, well, what are you doing with my data? What are you gonna, like, what type of emotional intelligence? Like, why do you want my emotions, right? So you begin to really doubt that. And right now, we're currently working with UX to disclose that information and properly provide our information, provide our customers with an appropriate response to what we are using the data for. And at the end, it's essentially to benefit them, and thus creating an About Ava page that if they have any more questions or concerns or feedback, we'd be more than happy to do it. And that's just a way of how we're continuing to build trust through transparency within Autodesk.
Cool. I'm going to go ahead and call it there because the last 3 slides are really Autodesk specific, and we're a little bit over time. But basically, all you need to know here is that we're looking at Ava through a new lens, a bidirectional lens, wherein she's treated as a conversational interface, as the face of customer engagement at Autodesk, and then also treating her dialogue system framework, the back end, as something that can be used to power other applications and services.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. But we just hold on one second. I mean, if there is a question, we're welcome. I think we have a time for now for a question, or also you can talk to them in the reception. So, come on, we just saw a voice and video. There's got to be questions here. Come on.
I want to know why you gave her an accent.
The New Zealand accent.
Uh-huh.
So we wanted a unique voice, and the providers in the space at the time didn't really have accents. We started this project over a year ago. And when we did our first round of user testing, which Yizel shared a little bit of, what we saw is that the English accent and the New Zealand accent were perceived with more intelligence, and people had a higher confidence in the system. So for that reason, we were between the New Zealand accent, the Kiwi accent, and the English accent, and at that point it was just a design choice because both were very positively perceived. So, yeah.
Cool.
Thanks. Question, Prince? Yeah.
Thank you so much. A lot of great learnings here. In the last slide, you showed about not showing a human purple eyes, but why show a human picture?
Good point. So we decided to use a human picture because we wanted to provide that type of comfort for our customers as to we weren't just handing them off to a machine, and humans tend to be a little bit more perceptive or feel more comfortable when they're around a human face, even if that means that it is a bot. We've actually done some market research in terms of when using animations instead of a human face, and we found that for animations, you tend to get less natural language input and more just like automatic responses or more hesitation about interacting with it. So with the human face, we were able to do a hybrid of the two while providing both conversational language and natural language input with interactive buttons and predictive language.
Yeah, just one more thing on that. So yes, the human agent, it's kind of premature to introduce a voice and video human-like virtual agent, but it has a lot to do with our long-term vision. So what our research is telling us, both secondary and primary, is that a digital human has about 5 benefits, 2 of which being an increase in comprehension. So when we're trying to educate our customers on how to do things in the help and learning space, it does have an increased retention of information. And then secondly, we found that having a voice and video version with the human, it helps with emotional diffusion. So in customer support, people are coming in pretty heated. Something has gone wrong. And being able to kind of diffuse those emotions is something that's much more easily done when you can show and demonstrate a sense of empathy as opposed to trying to do so through text. So with text, there's a lot of nuances. If I text you and I say, I'm fine, what the heck does that mean? If it's my girlfriend sending it to me, it's a pretty bad sign. But So the idea here is that there's a lot more that we can convey in a face-to-face interaction than we can through text. And given that the nature of our interactions requires that emotional diffusement, that was kind of why we introduced the face, the avatar.
I also want to add that a lot of our interactions aren't just Q&A. There's more depth to it. So we do have certain walkthroughs where it's more conversational, and we want to disambiguate between what the customer is really asking, because we found that our customers sometimes might think that they're looking for one particular issue, but their solution is on another end.
Actually, I'm going to go ahead and cut off questions now, just because we're running a little bit over, and I want to get to the awards. And I assume you guys will be around for a few minutes in the reception, so
We will.
please feel free. So thank you, River and Yizel.
Thank you, guys.